Inclusion Podcast by Anola Consulting. Hello, welcome along to the Human Inclusion Podcast from Anola Consulting. Absolutely delighted that you joined us today, and I'm thrilled that you're going to meet with Dominique Pitt from Vallum Associates. So I'm going to just introduce her to you right away. Dominique, good afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really glad you come. And of course, you represent Vallum Associates, of course, who are a partner firm with ours. So I'm delighted to be able to work with Vallum. And you're an international, you're more than international, you're a global recruitment business.
We are indeed.
Very impressive client bank as well. But you are the director of the insurance business, which is a fairly new proposition for Vallum. Am I right? Tell me a bit about that.
So we've been going within the Vallum business for about 2 years now, but I've been in the insurance market for well over 10 years. My whole career has basically been all about insurance recruitment and watching businesses change and evolve. So yeah, I'm very entrenched in that market, and actually I've got quite a passion for it. So
do you? Why are you passionate about the insurance market?
I think because it's the best kept secret, and when I was coming through my, I suppose, education, insurance was never an option. It was never a discussion. So having fallen into it off the back of being a salesperson, if you would, has been an interesting surprise, an educational development, and I suppose an eye-opening experience that has lasted a very long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to get into all of that. So, of course, you know this is what we call the Human Inclusion Podcast, and Anola Consulting is a human inclusion business. And we say that for a very important reason, because what we're interested in is the conversation about how do you promote and protect, I guess, what it is to be human within the workplace. And particularly in times where we see the workplace is automating, we see some interesting things taking place within our workspace. The idea of literally promoting the notion of humanity within the workplace seems to us a really important idea. So that brings with it belonging and inclusion and all that stuff. But every time we meet a guest, we're always keen to understand something about what we call their inclusion story. Most of the people that I've ever seen and worked with that are passionate about inclusion aren't passionate about it for some intellectual association with it.
Agreed.
They tend to be passionate about it because there's a human story to it. Can I ask you a little bit about yours?
Oh gosh, mine's a winding story.
Go. We like winding stories.
Yeah, okay, right. So
We like those.
So let's start with me and my parents. So my father, who was English, met my mother on holiday in Dominica. They fell in love. He told her to come to England. He wrote her lots of letters, and she did. She came over in the 80s. Now, what's interesting is that my father was actually working class. He had gone to grammar school and gone to university off the back of being very smart at mathematics. But my mother, who had come from the Caribbean, was actually middle class. Her dad worked in the government. They owned a lot of land. Although there was 12 children, they were actually relatively very well off. So my father told a story, he passed away now, but he told this story that he told my mum to come to England, and when she arrived, he didn't own a house. So she was mortified, and she was like, buy a house immediately, because she's always come from land and property and things like that. So that dynamic between my mother and my father was kind of the starting place, because my father was a teacher, my mum worked in a college, and her conversation to me was be a doctor, be a teacher, be a lawyer. That was what they knew, as a first generational person from the Caribbean. But she herself really struggled within the workplace, and actually she did the same job for 30 years because of it. My father was a teacher, and although he embedded good educational practice into me, again, he wasn't entrepreneurial, he wasn't visionary. So him and my mother actually went back and forth quite a lot about things like buying another house, expanding on our house, because there was that differencing of opinion and class. As I got on older and my father passed away, I really lost a lot of direction, and actually had my son when I was very young. So I was 16 when I had my son. And all I knew was I wasn't going to be a statistic. I didn't know how, didn't know why, but I knew that wasn't going to be the end of my journey. And my mother was determined also. So she really was a backbone of, you're going to go to university. And I was dyslexic and I was a very good talker, but I was very, very bad at essays. So I always had this struggle with education. I loved it. I was a bookworm. I could read very, very well, but I couldn't write. So I suppose I kind of always dropped into this facet of doing very well at presentations and awfully at essays. So I kind of always went through the middle. So I went to university. I studied to be a teacher, because my mother didn't know any different. Be a teacher, you'll get 6 weeks off to spend with your child. But actually, I wanted to pursue a career. So my friend said to me, do you know what? I think you should be a salesperson. Maybe start with a estate agency. That's kind of a great direction you can go in. So I finished my teaching degree. So I had it, worst case scenario.
Oh, well, okay, yeah.
Yeah, fall back on something. I got a 2-1 by the skin of my teeth.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, but off the back of that, I really realised that I didn't want to be a teacher. I didn't have a passion for it. And to be frank, you didn't earn enough money, So what had happened in that process of being in education, higher education, my cohort of people that were all ethnically mixed, and there wasn't that many of us, right? So we stuck together.
Whereabouts were you raised, as a matter of interest?
So I lived in Wembley.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I lived in Wembley and I went to Middlesex University, and I met people along the way. I actually didn't go to university with anyone from my school or my college.
Didn't you?
No. And I suppose if we take it back to me being an only child, I was very used to just being independent, and pursuing whatever path I wanted to go down. And actually, if we go back, I wanted to be an actor. That's what I really wanted.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. And my mother was like, absolutely not.
Not a proper job?
No, not a proper job. You're not studying drama. You're not doing any of that stuff.
Brilliant.
And actually, sidebar, my son ended up being a child actor off the back of...
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. So as I was coming through the end of my degree, one of my friends that was 1 year older than me, actually, he used to help me with all my essays, bless him. And he actually has his own recruitment company now. So he was like, you need to be an estate agent. That's the only way that we as ethnic minorities are going to be able to break through this barrier.
Wow.
This pay barrier. And
Wow.
actually, if I look at my cohort, all of us are either recruitment consultants, estate agents, software sales. The numbers don't lie. You can't not be promoted if you've hit your target, right? So that was a very prominent conversation in my cohort.
You see, I've talked to you about this before. I remember when we talked, we did an event. Well, you kindly hosted an event, didn't you, in London, at the back end of last year?
Yeah.
And I remember you saying that about the numbers don't lie, and I was very taken with that. And I was thinking, so is your view that the sales environment is a more meritocratic environment in that case?
Yeah, I think, from my experience of being a director and working in different types of sales businesses, is there still bias? Yes. But it's much harder to be biased. And actually, a lot of business owners, when it's about, doing deals and driving a business forward from a ownership, I own the revenue I bring in personally, actually, there's a lot more meritocracy, because you're able to actually shine for who you are. I think if I look at some of the people that I work with, that I place, they are a cog in a very big wheel. Mm-hmm. How do they actually shine and get themselves across? It can be a lot harder, I think, if you don't have the ability to do deals.
It's really interesting. So let me just test you on that a little bit, because I'm interested by this idea. So I come from a sales background as well, so it's interesting for me to hear you say that. Is your experience that the doing of deals, so whether you're writing business, selling houses, writing insurance contracts, writing whatever recruitment contracts, no one can deny that you've sold more than the person next to you, right? That's just an equitable.
Just
I sold this many. I build that much. You build that much, right? That's simple.
Yeah.
Does that therefore then follow then the promotion process follows that, or do you feel that maybe you, as minority ethnic people, that we still find that we can be the top biller, but just because you're the top biller doesn't necessarily follow you're going to then be the manager or the director or whatever else?
No, in my experience, if you're doing those numbers, you are being promoted.
Oh, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
I've never really worked in a business that I've looked across the floor and thought that person should have been promoted. It doesn't really happen like that. I think as you get more senior, say director level, now that's slightly different.
Okay.
There's lots of other dynamics that go into scenarios that make you a successful leader. But that initial climb, I think, is much easier in my personal experience.
And I'm not fishing for a right or wrong answer, but I'm just curious about this. And so that climb, that initial climb, you say.
And not just climb from a promotional perspective, from a pay bracket perspective.
Sure.
How we all viewed, because we were, why was I successful? Because I actually did a study when I did my dissertation of what makes ethnic minority people successful. Is it class? Is it influence? Is it mentor? Or is it education? And actually, it's a combination of mentor, typically, and class, from my experience, from people that have been around me. So how I viewed my career was, if I hit X number, that's a pay rise. I would have to work 2, 3, 4 years to get that kind of pay rise. So my motivation was different, because I'd watched my mother never get a pay rise, never get an opportunity, you know, be clearly held back, you know, and because of that, you know, she turned around to me when I was in my early 20s. I said, because we always have this back and forth, don't you want to go and work for the government? It'd be much easier, get a pension.
You still need a proper job.
Can you imagine being the government? Absolutely not. But in her mind, that made sense. And I said, well, look at you, Mum. You know, you've been in the same place for 30 odd years. And she was like, I know I'm never going to get promoted in this place. But my mum's strategy was different. She realised that early on. My mother built houses.
Yeah.
So she saved up all her pennies. She never got a pay rise, but she would extend the house. She would get a tenant. She would build a studio flat. She would, you know, and I watched that entrepreneurship.
Which is an entrepreneurship for sure.
Of course, to the point where she had a portfolio of 10 houses by the time I was in my early 30s.
Amazing.
And still worked her normal, you know, administration job and
Incredible.
Never ate out. And she managed her scenario that worked for her. So I, in my mind, thought, well, if I'm going to face that same barrier, especially I am a single parent, you know, and I had come from quite a challenging background, being a single parent, and the area I grew up in. I mean, I was raised in Wembley, but I lived in Harlesden. So when I looked around at my friends that didn't go to university and what they were doing, it was like, well, you've got a couple of options here. You can go down a path that's not going to be so great.
Sure.
There's a lot of money attached to it, or you can hit that number and get a pay rise.
Wow.
So my motivation was different to a lot of other people's. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you, a fascinating intersectionality with you, of course, because you're a woman of colour, but you're biracial.
Yeah.
You're sharing about your being a single parent. To what extent, and particularly the biracial component, because as a biracial person, I'm fascinated.
We have an affinity.
We have that thing going on there for sure.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What difference does it make to you? How has being biracial impacted your story?
Oh, wow. Gosh, that's a really interesting question. To think about how I structure that answer. I think, so let's start off with the first thing. I didn't know, obviously I knew. I didn't understand the complexity of race until I was very much older. I think I was very lucky that my parents were married. All my dad's friends were very mixed in all different types of ways. So I had quite a shielded life until my father passed away when I was 14. We would go horse riding. We would, do all sorts of things that typically were outside of what I think a lot of people expect of me as a mixed race female, as a single parent. And that's because my dad had made a lot of friends at university that were of all different races, creeds, and definitely financially. So when I started to really feel an impact of being mixed race was probably as I was leaving secondary school. Mm-hmm. Because it was a challenging time. You're meeting boys, it's all different types of things. And then you get greeted with, you're a pretty mixed race girl. Girls don't like you. There's a lot of stigma attached to being a mixed race person. Oh, like people are so shocked that my father's white.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's an anomaly that my father's white, that my parents were married. There's those types of comments that you navigate. And then
I'm smiling. You got nice hair.
Yeah, love your hair. You're gonna be a bitch. That was a very
seriously?
That was a very big one for probably until up to now actually.
Wow.
That I actually didn't realise was a microaggression until I was much older.
That's a pretty
significant.
That's a macroaggression.
Yeah. So that was a comment I used to get very, very frequently.
Wow.
So that whole dynamic, I think we discussed it, right? It's kind of you're too black to be white, too white to be black, and comments like you speak well, So it was a mixture of things that I actually didn't really contemplate properly until I was probably about 21. And that was coming out of the back of university and trying to figure out what I did for a career. Then you start interviewing, then you start meeting people in different businesses, then you start realising, oh, everyone that opens the door is black, everyone that serves you is black, but no one I'm meeting is black. And I would say, and it might be wrong of me, but I probably have, I think, a mixed race privilege in the sense where there's doors I reckon that open to me. Actually, no, I know for a fact. There's doors that will open for me that my son, who is a darker skinned black male, would struggle with. And I probably more started to really have more challenging scenarios as my son got bigger, because he would go through things at a much younger age, 6, 7, 8, that I never experienced at school, because I think I was pretty little mixed race, whereas he was darker skinned male.
So interesting.
So they would say things to me like, he's very bright but, or he's too much. And I'm just like, he's not a bad child. What do you mean he's too much? But actually what they meant was he was too colourful, he had too much personality, he had too much energy. And I was just like, do you know what? Luckily, I had this career that had started to take off in sales. I was like 3 or 4 years in. And one of his teachers said to me, do you know what? He is not made for this type of school. He will always be too much. And he'll be penalised for it.
For being there.
So we put him into theatre school.
Did you really?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, of course, you were saying a child actor.
We put him into theatre school. And actually what happened was he had done a show called X School Has Got Talent.
Yeah, sure.
Talent. And he'd come out, and you can imagine I'm a recruiter, I'm a salesperson, so I was just like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Show me. And he was like, Mum, don't worry about it. And I'm worried about it because I want this child to come out and obviously do well. And anyway, he rocks up onto this stage. I'll never forget this day. And he's wearing my fur coat and my Timberland boots, and he had backup dancers. He put this whole production together, and he sang CeeLo Green.
Come on.
And it was perfect, and he got a standing ovation, literally. And I was like, that's it, we're putting him to theatre school. But they never really gave him recognition. He never got a medal that he was meant to get. And it was just like, you guys are just a bit mean, aren't you?
Yeah, that's not good, is it?
Yeah, so it was watching him experience things comparing it to my own experience and then being in the corporate world and being the one ethnic person, being the one female person, one or two female people. So it was a very big combination of things.
And it is complex, as you say. How do you feel about, if I may ask you this, how do you feel about this is not the words you use, so forgive me if I'm, and so denounce them if you don't like the phrase, but as a mixed race person, I recognise the fact that you alluded to it, that I get kind of white passing privilege, right? How do you feel about that?
I think from my experience, that privilege only gets you so far. And actually, I think once you get to director level, it doesn't pay you anything.
Doesn't pay you, and it's really...
No, not at all. If anything, I think then that's when you probably have reached a ceiling that is quite hard to push past. And because you haven't had to jump, you haven't seen as many hurdles actually. When I was faced with my own experience that I thought was actually very, very challenging, it was super extra more shocking, I think. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, the amazing thing with your story is that you've been perfectly socialised around the idea of being biracial as well, because you've lived with both of your parents, and that's a really interesting experience. Because I think I've told you before, I didn't live with either of mine, so I had this kind of really weird kind of thing about what does it actually mean to be biracial, and of course in a different generation to yours as well.
Of course.
But my story is less interesting than yours. I want to pursue you. So you talk about you coming into. You decide you're not going to be a teacher. You're not doing that. You're going into... Did you go into a estate agency?
I was an estate agent. I did that for about 2.5, 3 years. Camden, Regent's Park area.
Did you kill it?
I killed it. Yeah, absolutely. But I worked super hard.
Yeah.
I think I've always had an affinity for your smaller boutique type businesses. So the company I worked for, they were the competitor of Foxtons, but they were self-owned. They were yeah. And in reality, they came from very humble beginnings. So
interesting.
I don't think I would work well in a big, corporate machine. It's just not something I can really identify with.
That's interesting.
If you look at my career, it's always been your small, medium-sized boutique growing type businesses. And that really was a great training ground. They taught me everything about, sales, and they were hungry to beat Foxtons, right? And I was in it. I believed in them, and they were called London Residential, actually. I never forget the day that I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. And I didn't want to do it anymore because I was working on the weekends a lot and I wasn't seeing my son.
You're not having a life, are you?
I wasn't having a life. I was burning myself out quite a lot. And my director at the time said to me, "You'll be back." And he said, "You'll be back." And I said, "Oh, I don't think I will, And the main reason I actually left was because the base salary as an estate agent, I doubled that going into recruitment just as a base. And my son had got like a half scholarship to Sylvia Young. And I said to him, "Look, I've got a year of money, right? If this doesn't work for you," because what they don't tell you when you get a scholarship is you actually have to pay it back, right? So the work they do has to go straight back. So if you don't get work and I don't do deals, I'm going to go back to being an estate agent and you're going to go back to normal school." And that's what I did. I gave us a year. Yeah. And actually, when I got my first associate director title, my director from London Residential, Tony, shout out to Tony, taught me everything I knew about sales, but he congratulated me. And I said, "You know what? He was a really, really tough director. Tough. But he gave me a real backbone, that's lasted me my whole career." Yeah.
And you do need those people along the way that believe in you, don't you?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the great things to me, that when you meet people that believe in you, even, I mean, you sound like your story is one of determination and confidence and all that good stuff. But sometimes when you don't believe in yourself, you need somebody alongside you that does. Let me fast forward a little bit, because I was, again, intrigued by your idea about the steps on the early career steps.
Yeah.
And then you get to a kind of a ceiling where it doesn't count for much, to your point. One of the things I like about the work that our firms do together is the idea of this model that we have about joining, thriving and staying.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm conscious of the fact that it's one thing to get into an elite occupation, but it's quite another thing to get on in an elite occupation. Tell me a little bit about the work you do, because I know Lloyd's of London, one of your major clients, aren't they?
So no, they're not our major client. We partner with, most of our clients are connected to Lloyd's, either syndicates or brokers.
I beg your pardon, sorry.
Yeah.
So you work in the Lloyd's market?
Work within the Lloyd's market.
I see.
But Monica Stanku was on our panel for our first event. She's actually on our panel for our second event as well. She adds a huge amount of value in regards to the data and the frameworks that our clients can use for their inclusion, diversity, etc. policies. So the Lloyd's market has been through a huge amount of change over the last 10 years since I've been a part of it. It's quite a different place.
Tell me some of the change, because I was doing a little bit of reading up to for us to meet together, and of course I was reading about was it David Flint, who was the first black broker in 1978, I think.
He's actually on our panel for our next event.
Is that
yeah,
right?
He is. Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, 29th of Feb we're having another event, so he's one of the panel members, and I'm really excited to have him on.
Oh wow,
yeah,
that would be fascinating. So he's literally the first black broker, wasn't he? Wrote his first ticket in 1978, as I said. Very impressive. But tell me what's changed. What do you think's changing in the Lloyd's market? As far as D&I is concerned.
So I think that when diversity and inclusion was, let's start with diversity. I think there was an ambition from the Lloyd's market, the insurance market, to be more diverse. They were aware that, a lot of people call it an old boys club. There was a very big policy when I first started that, you couldn't be a project manager or business analyst or something like that within that market unless you had that experience. Or how do you get that experience if no one will let you in, right? So it was always this tussle. And I think also the ripple effect of that was because there wasn't new ideas coming in regard to technology, there was kind of this merry-go-round of a lot of projects being done the same way as this guy and that guy, but that guy's not doing it very well. You've just pulled X guy from here, put him in there, now we're doing the same project badly again. So I think the understanding that actually you can have a layer of SME and a layer of, SME in data or, a technology, and your SME in the Lloyd's market should be able to help, and that way you get a melting pot of ideas. I think that the acknowledgement of that was a big step for the Lloyd's market, 100%. So I think that acknowledgement, and also an awareness that actually our market share is dying. You've got hubs in Dubai and, US, and writing the same specialist risk, it's not taking them a month.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Time to market. So I think in the last 10 years, there's been a number of factors that have pushed the insurance market to say, actually, we need to do things differently. And I think their first point of call was to come to someone like myself and say, I would like more female test managers in my interview process with Lloyd's market experience or with insurance experience or with GI experience. But the problem is that those ladies don't exist. So you have to go down. So I think once they went through that transition of, okay, I would like to see a more diverse portfolio of a certain type of person, developer, tester, whatever it might be. Once they got their head around the fact that actually it's our responsibility to educate and grassroots grow talent, then the balance started to become a little bit more equal. So that, I think, has been a major shift.
So that's a really interesting commentary. So I can see then that the market opened up to want to look different. I was talking to a Swiss banker not so long ago, and I said, why are you wanting to have this conversation with me? And she said, because the face of wealth has changed. And I thought it was an interesting thing to say. Yeah, I thought it was very interesting because it made me wonder, if it hadn't changed, would you be talking to me? And the answer is probably no, but that's a slightly different point. But so I can see that the market maybe looks different. I don't know how many more David Flints there are around writing deals. I'd be interested to know the answer to that. I can see it. People who look different from the old boys club are there. But I suppose my question, which is an inclusion question, is what does it feel like to be different in the Lloyd's market?
What does it feel like to? I think for a long time, it felt quite lonely for people that were different. I think for a long time, it was a challenge to navigate, because from my experience of working with diverse talent in the market, they are so excited to get into the market, to grow within the market. But once they're in there and they're the only underwriter that's black and female, or, then actually it can be a very lonely experience.
For sure.
Yeah. I think a lot of the work we've been doing with our clients is, and what we discussed in the event that we had, last year, was you can do your grassroots recruitment, and that's great. You can bring these people in and all they know is you. However, as they navigate their career ladder, your responsibility to help them to feel included and not isolated, I think, is something that businesses are still challenged to solve.
I think that's right, because I think that isolation, which ultimately feels to me potentially to lead to alienation, which is difficult, and then you become this. I think there's a problem, right? Which is that I think that when I look at industry, I look at the elite occupations, of which where you work is certainly one, and I say they've done a reasonable job, or there's a way to go, but they're doing a better job on representation. But the problem with saying we're better represented is that if the talent that was previously underserved or underrepresented then has to represent themselves in the marketplace in order to just survive, then really you haven't achieved that much, have you? Because what you've actually said is that I've now got, to be slightly crude about it, you're saying we're a very diverse organisation. In the same way that, a high street shop is. We've got this dress, but we've got it in black as well as white. We've got it in gay as well as straight. We've got it in, neurodivergent and so on and so forth. And I think the thing that I find interesting is that if organisations particularly want to break out of the kind of paradigm they're in, then that requires us to be able to leverage that cognitive diversity, that notion of saying, for me to be able to think freely and for myself and as myself. But what I see in the elite occupations is that people tend not to think freely for themselves and as themselves. They tend to think like they're expected to think, and they conform to a certain behaviour.
I definitely think conformity is a challenge within the market. So a classic example, I, for years and years and years, would never dare to wear braids.
That's interesting.
I would never dare to wear the type of nails I actually really enjoy, colourful, Caribbean.
Fur coats and your Timberlands.
Not
doing that.
None of that. But even actually, now I wear bright colours. But back in the day, I would wear a blue or black suit, and I would conform, right? And then I never forget, it got to a point where when I was an associate director, I started doing my colourful nails. But I'd got to a point where I was like, if a client doesn't want to work with me because I've got colourful nails. I actually don't need to work with them, and that's okay.
Wow.
But I got to that point. I felt comfortable, and I had a lot of clients by then. I'd
Yeah,
established myself, right? And I think that's similar to what we talked about at the event, which is that evolution of self only comes, I think, as you've climbed in your career and you're at a point where you can say no. I think early on, your natural, or what I was actually told, was to be as much of a mirror as possible. That's what you're taught.
Yeah.
How to survive in that. And actually, I think what some people don't understand, the challenge of being diverse in that elite world, is the situations that you run into. I'm very fortunate. I had a cohort of friends. We were all striving towards the same thing. We were all trying to climb this ladder. We were all in sales. We were all facing off to that elite environment. So we shared ideas, we shared challenges, we cried with each other, you know? And I was fortunate that I had that. But a lot of diverse candidates, they are one of. None of their friends work in that environment. They might be the only person in their whole entire family that's gone to university. They are the one. And their family is rooting for them, but they can't help them. And I think that for me is what really makes me passionate and excited when I do see the market changing. Because, you know, I've had candidates that are so nervous. They're shaking because their whole family is expecting them to get this job, to enter the insurance market, to change the narrative
For the whole
for
family.
the whole family, right? So the pressure, and then they start, and then they're not included or they're not invited to the pub, you know?
Wow.
I think, yeah, people, that for me is something that I watch quite often.
And that leaves you with chills, doesn't it? It makes me
Yeah.
think about, you know, the young boy that wants to get a professional footballer's contract. I mean, it feels like the same kind of same story. I'm interested, without being a pedant about it, but I'm intrigued by it. It's funny, isn't it, the way we use our language, you know, the notion of diverse candidates. And I'm curious about that, because I think that the one of the difficulties that creates is this idea that when you talk about diverse, you're talking about not just other, but the implication is it's sort of less than. It's the kind of this way. I know you don't use it in that language, but it's a very strange business. And I think to myself that I'm kind of quite careful about using the language underrepresented.
Oh yeah, that's probably a yeah.
I tell you why I like it.
Okay, go on.
The reason I like it so much is because I think that diversity is difference. Diversity is suggesting that we and each and every one of us are unique. So the reality is, even those that old boys club that you talked about, if there's 6 of them in the old boys club and they all go to the same drinking club and they all wear pinstripe trousers and they all went to the same school, they're still diverse because they're 6 unique individuals.
Yes.
Now, whether they're broadly representative of the community is a different matter.
Got you.
And I get nervous, not with you, of course, but I get nervous by this because someone was telling me a while ago that a recruiter actually said that they went to see somebody from a big public sector framework piece they were recruiting for. And the guy said, "Let me talk to you about diverse talent." And the man said, "Well, of course, we're going to hire the best people first, and then we're going to look for some diverse talent." So to myself, how do you even say that with a straight face? How's that a thing to say? And I think it feels like we need to change that narrative a little. Do you know what I mean? That narrative feels like it needs to get changed.
I would agree with you on that. I think sometimes words, as these situations are evolving, you are attached to a word because it's a word that's used quite often.
And it's an easy word, right?
Because my interest in this whole topic comes from the notion that actually, so there's a back and forth I have, which is, if you are from Scotland and you live on a council estate, are you worse off than an ethnic minority that lives in London in a council estate? Or are you both challenged
What have you come to a conclusion about that?
Yes, of course you are both challenged. Of course you are underrepresented, right? And I think, but arguments I've had in different, dinner parties is you as an ethnic person will always have more challenges than a white person. And I don't believe that.
Interesting.
I don't believe that because my father was from a council estate, right? So I've seen it, right? I've seen that climb. And actually, for me, when I say diverse talent, what I mean is anyone who is underrepresented. And sometimes a lot of that does stem from socioeconomic challenges.
No doubt.
And if money wasn't a thing, right? That's a question I like to ask people. But if money wasn't a problem, I would love to just be able to educate children on the options that they have, because the education system is not built to do that, right? So if you would have told me, person who's good at presenting, who's confident, who is intelligent and can understand lots of different scenarios, that I could have been a reinsurance project manager and I could have earned X and actually go and do a degree in geography.
Yeah.
Would I have gone and done something different? Probably. Definitely.
Really interesting.
Of course. And yes, I think going back to what you're saying, people who are underrepresented are what we as recruitment consultants should be helping our clients to find.
I think that the underrepresentation point is really right, because, and I'll tell you why I think it's so important, is because I think that there is a profoundly important distinction by saying that I, growing up in the way I grew up in care, I may not be educated, but I'm intelligent. And actually the reality is that my intelligence is probably worth more to you than somebody else who's got exactly the same education and just thinks like you. And so there's, I think, a distinction between education and intelligence we need to work out. Because I can tell you, some of the kids that grew up on the streets that I grew up on, they know what time it is, right? Some of those kids who grew up in Harlesden who hustle and do their thing, right? Please don't be telling me those are not intelligent people. They might not be educated, but that's a different matter. I think the issue about, I was intrigued by where you were going with your point about the working class kids, those two examples. I think there is a point at which there is a factor that says that it's not simply the colour of your... not necessarily just the colour of your skin that counts. There's an issue about the colour of your parents' money that counts, right? So I think that's something. But I think it's probably the case, because I'm fairly sure it would be the case, that if you took two underrepresented, underprivileged families and the white underprivileged child is matched up against the black underprivileged child, the black underprivileged child has got one more stigma to bear.
Of course.
Right. So it's not even level at that. Do you see what I'm saying? But that doesn't mean, and this is one of the great problems, I think, that the underrepresented, uneducated, underserved white child, their inclusion story that attaches to that child or that young person or that adult, if we forget that we do that at our peril, because inclusion is about creating the environment where all of us can flourish, isn't it? And everybody in this space. Tell me a couple of quick things I wanted just to check in with you about. Tell me a little bit about what you'd like to see change. Let's fast forward 10 years. What would you like the insurance market to look like in 10 years' time?
Oh wow, that's a great question. What would I like it to look like?
Maybe what sort of things do you think could be improved?
I think that in general, women need to feel more comfortable that their career will not be impacted by having children.
Wow.
I think in general. I think the notion of grassroots, education and growth of underrepresented talent within a business cannot be all you do. You know, there has to be more than that. I think some businesses, they think that, you know, we've done that.
Yeah, exactly.
We've done our outreach. We've used a couple of grads, you know, and
look at us.
Yeah, no, that I think is something that, and I think there has to be a strategy behind really retaining that talent.
Nice, really nice.
Yeah, I think that's my main thing, and that's what we are working with a number of our clients to do. You know, yes, we as a recruitment business can help you to gain this talent, and we can sell your business. And actually, I only work with clients that I genuinely believe that's what they want to achieve. If you say to me that's what you want, and I see that it's a tick box exercise, that's not something that
you're not going to do that
with. No, not at all. So, and I'm fortunate that the clients we have are fabulous in that regard. But I think it's taking it that one step further, that you have managers, leaders who really want diverse teams.
I love it.
They do, but they don't know how to help them to feel included. And I think it's really investing in that educational piece, I think, is what I would like to see more of.
Amazing.
Because what we learned from the event the other day was, you know, a lot of people they know the term microaggression, but they don't know what it actually means. They hadn't heard, they may have heard it, but they haven't felt it. And actually people standing up in connecting diverse perspectives and talking about their own personal experience, and some of those people were really brave. Actually,
it was such an impressive event. Yeah, it was great.
I think really helped to give context. So I think what I would like to see is leaders, you know, taking that step further to really understand and have context behind their policy.
I love it.
Yeah.
And one quick question, and then I'll just tidy up. But are you seeing any sort of regression or stepping away from diversity and inclusion within the Lloyd's market? Or are you seeing people moving in or moving out? Because there's obviously, you'd be aware of the noise that's around the agenda at the moment.
So we work across the Lloyd's market, life and pensions, GI. So I think I talk a lot about Lloyd's, but I want to kind of talk about insurance as a whole. I think across different markets, you have different trends, if you would, within insurance. So the Lloyd's market has set an ambition 1 in 3, and they've led from the front on that. You know, they've got a very mixed of, you know, gender senior management team. So they've led from the front, and I can see what they're trying to achieve. That is rippling out, but I would say that in technology, you will get more ethnicity diversity in your underwriters and your brokers. Definitely more work to be done, right? So I think it can be easy for those numbers to be skewed a little bit. I would say across your places like your life and your pension spaces that are more connected to your asset management businesses, they've got a long way to go. You know?
Really, really interesting.
And GI, I think, has always been more like your retail banking. So I think generally people know what a direct line is, you know, that there is generally a bit more of an awareness in that regard. So I think they're at a little bit of a head start.
Wow.
I think the biggest hurdle that a lot of insurance businesses need to overcome is that gap between your grassroots that you've invested in and your senior management and that between.
There's a chasm there, isn't there? And
huge.
There's a chasm. And again, that's why I like the work we do with you, because I think there's a really interesting conversation that takes place that says the two things has to happen simultaneously, right? On the one hand, I've got to be able to prepare underrepresented talent to thrive in your organisation, but you've also got to prepare your organisation for underrepresented talent to thrive. And those two things have to come together. Final question for you. You said you've worked with small boutiques and you don't necessarily tend to work those big conglomerates. You work for Vallum Associates, and Vallum Associates is a great story itself, not least of which because it's a minority-led business, which is a very exciting, and you punch the weight that your organisation punches at is incredible. Tell me, what's your favourite thing about the work you do?
Vallum, I worked with Malvin, the founder, CEO, in our first ever recruitment company. So he was maybe like a year or so ahead of me in his recruitment journey. And we bonded over the fact that we were both black, you know, and he always kept in touch with me. And this is what I'm saying about he was one of those people that I called when I was having a tough time, right? So my belief in Vallum as a business has come from watching the journey of it. That's the first thing. And, you know, one of the big reasons I wanted to join Vallum was because of their actual diversity. Because I'd always been one of two, you know, max. In global businesses, you know, I'd worked in like businesses that were over 100 plus people. So what I believed that they wanted to achieve and what I bought into and what I enjoy is the fact that we have a positive impact. I have a positive impact on my client and my candidate. I solve my business problem for my client. I solve my problem for my candidate. And it sounds cheesy, but you change people's lives sometimes. You know, like I never forget, I quite recently placed somebody into an insurtech business, and the guy he interviewed with said, "Tell Dominique I said hello. She's the reason why I work in insurance." And it's moments like that,
Beautiful,
you know, that are the reason why I do this. And it's interesting because I watched Diary of a CEO, because obviously I was coming on here and I thought, let me just have a little look at something. And I watched the one with Busta Rhymes, and he said that when you love something and you're obsessed by it, it doesn't feel like work, which I agree with. And he said the reason why he loved making music was because he impacted people's lives. Someone would drive past in their car and they're playing his song. Like, you can't deny that that's an impact that they've had. So for me, you know, putting people into organisations that I believe in, especially as this diversity and inclusion journey has started to evolve, that person remembers me forever. That's the impact that I like to have.
Wow. What an absolute privilege to talk to you. Thank you so much.
It's been so great.
Oh,
Thank
it's
you
been
so
a
much.
joy.
You know what?
It's
That's like a journey. I forgot about all that stuff.
I love it. But that's the point. But you know what? The thing I think for us is the beautiful thing about that is your story and how you're wedging open the door of opportunity for other people, and that's so powerful. That Busta Rhymes point is lovely. I remember somebody telling me many, many years ago, and you're living proof of it. Find what you love doing, and you'll never have to work another day in your life.
Another day, and do you know what? You know, coming from where I came from, you know, Harlesden was a tough place, right? And when I looked at what some of my friends were doing in their lives, I thought, you know, all I've got to do is meet someone for a coffee, talk about what their projects are up to, and find them someone that helps them. I can do that easily. And it was hard to learn, but for me it was a walk in the park, because I really do enjoy understanding how businesses work, and I really like to help them to evolve. I enjoy that.
Amazing. Well, you've certainly evolved and grown into this amazing person that you are. Absolutely incredible. I bet your mother is like, okay, fair enough, I was wrong.
We did a project together. So I'd supported her on quite a few of the projects that she'd done, but we did a project together in COVID. We built 4 apartments together. And I only got to see them for the first time last year, back end of last year in December. And I looked around, because my mum has got 4 houses, 1 plot, and then we built 4 behind them. And she looked at me and she was just like, maybe never work for the government then. And I was just like,
Beautiful.
No, yeah. So yeah, my mum is super proud of me. And do you know what? My son's super proud of me. And that's all I can ask for. Yeah.
That's a perfect inclusion story. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, I hope you are recovering from that. Then you'll want to watch this one again. So thank you so much for being with us on our Human Inclusion podcast. We love to bring human stories to you, and what a wonderful human story we've had with Dominique's today. So if you want to find out more about Vallum Associates and the work that they do, and of course the work that Dominique does, reach out to them. The details you'll be able to get from our website. But I'm sure if you have recruitment issues that you're looking to solve for, this is the lady you want to talk to. Thank you so much for being with us.